I told my granddaughter a story that I have carried for 53 years. I have never shared it with anyone who didn't already understand its weight. Tonight, I will tell it here because you came to me with something in your eyes that I recognized. It wasn't from your mother or from your grandmother, God rest her. It was like looking in a mirror. A boy, 53 years ago, sat in a seat he had every right to occupy. First, let me look at you. Let me see your face without that shield. There. That is the face I know. Beneath the afternoon you've had, underneath whatever Mrs. Hendricks said to you in that office, beneath the long walk home and the tears you shed before coming here, I know you cried, Zora. You don't need to tell me. Your grandmother cried the same way. The jaw tightens when the Whitmore women hold something inside. Underneath all of that, this is your face. I need you to hear what I'm about to tell you with this face, the one that knows who you are. Good. Keep it there. I am going to tell you about a Tuesday in October 1970. I was 12 years old, wearing my good suit. I learned something on an airplane that took me 53 years to fully understand. I'm sharing it with you tonight, so you don't have to spend 53 years learning it yourself. Pour yourself more tea. This will take a while. Welcome to Golden Triumphant's Stories channel. We share inspiring stories of people who have triumphed against the odds. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy our stories. My father was Dr. Samuel Elijah Whitmore, your great-grandfather. He is the man in the white medical coat on the second shelf. He had the look of someone who never had time for nonsense. He was born in 1928 in Selma, Alabama, the son of a schoolteacher and a man who laid railroad tracks for 40 years without complaining. Complaining, he said, was a luxury for those who had already made it. My father made it, but not easily. He went to Morehouse on a partial scholarship and worked nights in a hotel kitchen. He attended Howard University College of Medicine at a time when most American medical schools did not accept black applicants. He became a cardiologist, one of the first black cardiologists in Alabama. He built a practice in Birmingham, and his patients, black patients who had been told their pain was lesser, trusted him with their lives. He wasn't warm in the usual sense. He didn't sit on the floor and play games or tell jokes at dinner. What he was, and I understood this as I grew older, was completely consistent. He did what he said he would do. He told the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. He treated everyone in front of him as if they deserved his full attention. In 1970, when I was 12, my father received an invitation from the European Cardiology Society. They wanted him to present his research on myocardial infarction in black patients, research that was a decade ahead of what American cardiology was sharing. The conference was in Paris. He was the only black physician from America invited that year. He decided to take me with him. He wanted me to see Paris. He wanted me to understand that the world was larger than Birmingham, Alabama. He wanted me to see him in that conference room, so I would know in my body, not just my mind, that a black man from Selma, Alabama could stand in front of European doctors and be the most important person in the room. He gave me the greatest gift a father can give. He showed me his excellence in the place where it lived. He dressed me in my good suit the morning of the flight. Not my church suit, my good suit. That distinction mattered a lot to my father, and therefore it mattered to me. My church suit was for Sundays and God. My good suit was for the world. Those moments when you needed to show the world exactly who you were and give it no excuse to see you as anything less. He polished my shoes himself. I remember this clearly, him kneeling in front of me in the hallway, working polish into the leather with a small brush, his large, careful hands moving in circles. He was already dressed in his own good suit. He said to my shoes, "When we walk onto that airplane, Elijah, you walk as if you have been on 100 airplanes. Do not look around with wide eyes. Sit in your seat and act like someone who belongs exactly where he is. Because you do. You belong exactly where you are. Do you understand me?" I said, "Yes, sir." He looked up at me then, the eyes of a man who made a decision long ago and lives by it every day. He said, "Good." Then he stood, put the brush away, and we went to the airport. I won't pretend I was calm inside. I was buzzing with the extraordinary fact of what was happening. The airport, the aircraft, the fact that we were going to Paris, France. But I walked beside my father just as he instructed, keeping my face where he told me to keep it, and inside I allowed myself to feel it all quietly. Our seats were 4A and 4B. First class. I had the window. My father's fellowship covered the upgrade, a recognition of his standing. He accepted it without fuss, just as he accepted most things that were simply right. I sat in seat 4A, looking out at the tarmac. I glanced around the first-class cabin once, carefully. I was the only black person there. I noted this in the way my father taught me, quietly, filing it away alongside everything else true about the room. My father sat in 4B, opened his briefcase, and took out his conference papers. He had a presentation to refine. He was already working. I never learned her name. I have thought about her for 53 years without ever knowing it. In my memory, she exists simply as the woman in the blue uniform, a kind of justice in its own way. She was white, middle-aged, and professional. She moved down the aisle with the ease of someone completely at home in her domain. She had a pleasant face. I remember that face particularly because what happened next came from it so smoothly that it took me a moment to realize what was happening. She stopped at row 4. She looked at me. She checked the seat numbers. She examined the tickets. My father produced them before she could ask, holding them out with the flat expression of a man who has spent his adult life anticipating this request. She studied the tickets for several seconds longer than necessary. Then she spoke to me, not to my father, but to me, the 12-year-old boy. She said warmly, "There seems to have been a little mix-up, sweetheart. These seats are first class. I think you'd be much more comfortable back in economy, where I'm sure we have some lovely seats available." She called me sweetheart. I sat very still. I kept my face where my father told me to keep it. Inside, something happened that I didn't have the language for at 12, but have spent 53 years trying to find words for. It felt as if the floor had opened slightly. The world rearranged itself around me in a way I did not expect, but somehow deep down, I had always known it was possible. My father put down his conference papers. He placed them deliberately on his knee, straightened them, and looked at the flight attendant with the expression he used in operating rooms when something had gone wrong and needed attention. Then he spoke, quietly, precisely, like a scalpel. "These are our assigned seats. Here are our tickets. We have paid for first class. We will be remaining in first class. I trust there is nothing further to discuss." She looked at him. She looked at me. She looked at the other first-class passengers, white faces arranged into the studied neutrality of people who have chosen not to be involved. She said she needed to talk to the purser before walking away. My father picked up his conference papers and went back to reading. I sat in seat 4A, looking at the tarmac, keeping my expression blank. I counted the seconds, reaching 660 before the purser arrived. The purser was white, professional, and smiling. He looked to be around 50, with the calm demeanor of someone seasoned in handling difficult situations. He checked our tickets and seats, glancing at my father, then at me and back to my father. He said there didn't seem to be any issues with the seating. He apologized for any inconvenience and hoped we would enjoy our flight before moving on. The woman in the blue uniform did not return to our row. Another attendant served us throughout the flight, a younger woman who brought our drinks and meals with a polite smile and didn't look at us in any specific way, which I realized was likely the best we could expect. My father said nothing about the situation during the flight. He reviewed his papers, ate his meal, and slept for about 2 hours over the dark Atlantic. While he slept, I studied his face, the face that had been composed and controlled all afternoon. In sleep, he looked like a tired man, and I thought, this is what it costs him. His composure requires effort. He builds and maintains it, but when he sleeps, that facade drops, revealing his fatigue like that of any man. When he woke, he was composed again before his eyes fully opened. I observed that process, and it has stayed with me. I want to share what I felt during those 11 hours over the Atlantic. The genuine version, not the one where I seemed unaffected, armored by my father's words. The first feeling was shame. Not anger, shame came first. I was 12 and a woman in a uniform had looked at me, in front of my father and the entire first-class cabin, and decided I did not belong in that seat. Some young part of me, still unformed despite my father's careful raising, wondered if she had seen something true. I questioned whether I had overlooked a rule. I pondered if there was a quality required in the cabin that she correctly identified me as lacking. This is the effect of humiliation before you have the means to resist it. It doesn't come as someone else's problem. It appears as a question about yourself. Then, at some point over the Atlantic, something changed. My father slept beside me, his conference papers neatly arranged on the tray table. In the dim cabin light, his face showed all the tiredness he concealed while awake. I looked at those papers, his careful notes in the margins, his argument built line by line with the attention of a man who knows the world will search for any flaw to discredit you. I couldn't grasp most of it. I was 12. But I felt the weight of it, and I thought, She tried to move him off this airplane. She tried to displace my father, the man who wrote these pages, whose work he would present in Paris, who had built his life on the belief that excellence is an argument no one can defeat. She tried to move him with a smile and a gesture toward the back of the plane. He had set down his papers, straightened them, picked them up again, and continued. I realized then that the shame was not mine. It had never been mine. It belonged to her, from the moment she thought of me that way, resulting in her smile and gesture. She had acted shamefully. I had simply existed in a seat I had every right to use. This distinction sounds simple. It isn't. It is one of the hardest lessons a person can learn. But once you grasp it, in your body and not just in your mind, it becomes the foundation for everything else. I was 12 and understood it for the first time somewhere over the dark Atlantic. I thought, the shame is hers. Then I fell asleep. Zora, I want you to grasp something about Paris in October 1970, seen through the eyes of a 12-year-old boy from Birmingham, Alabama, who had never left the South. It was everything I had imagined and more. The light was different, a special kind of gray-gold morning light that seemed to come from everywhere, as though the city was glowing from within. The buildings were old in a way American buildings aren't, not just old from age, but from having absorbed centuries of human life, events, and meaning until the stones seemed to remember things. The streets were narrow, loud, and smelled of bread, diesel, and an unnamed floral scent. My father gathered our bags efficiently, a man accustomed to travel, who knows the first thing to do in a new city is find your footing. We took a taxi to the hotel. It was near the conference center, a small, immaculate place on a quiet street where the staff addressed my father as Dr. Whitmore and escorted us to our rooms with the exact courtesy of people who understand their guests are significant. I stood at the window of my room, gazing out at Paris, thinking, I am here. I am really here. And then I went to find a croissant. I need to tell you about this croissant, Zora, because it matters more than it seems. I found a bakery 2 streets from the hotel. I walked there alone, with my father's permission, instructed to return in an hour and to act like someone who belonged. I went in and pointed at the largest croissant in the display. The woman behind the counter placed it in a small paper bag. I paid with the francs my father had given me. I ate it while standing on the pavement outside. It was warm, layered, buttery, and pulled apart in my hands. It tasted like nothing I had ever consumed, like breakfast transformed into something akin to art. I stood on a Paris street, eating a croissant while the October sun emerged from behind a cloud, shining on the cobblestones. I was 12 years old, told I didn't belong in a seat, yet here I was, on the other side of the ocean, enjoying the best thing I had ever tasted. I thought about the woman in the blue uniform. I thought, she tried to send me to the back of that airplane, and now I am standing in Paris eating a croissant. I laughed. Alone on the pavement, I laughed out loud, not a brittle laugh performing happiness, but a genuine laugh, the laugh of a boy who has learned something and found it, against all odds, funny. She tried to diminish me, and I was standing in Paris. The conference lasted 3 days. I attended all the sessions my father presented, sitting at the back of the room in a Paris conference hall, watching my father stand at a podium in front of 200 European cardiologists as he shared his research on myocardial infarction in black patients. He was extraordinary. I say that not as a son, though I say it as a son also, but as someone who has spent 22 years on a federal bench evaluating arguments and watching people make them. My father's command of that room was total. He spoke without notes. He moved through his research with the ease of a man who has lived inside it for years and knows every room of it, every corner, every place where the light falls differently. He had a gift for the precise word, not the impressive word, the precise one, the one that carried exactly the right weight and no more. He stood in that room, and he was the most important person in it. I watched the faces of the European cardiologists as he spoke. I watched them move from the polite attention of an audience receiving a colleague's work to something more concentrated, the leaning forward quality of people who are hearing something that is changing what they know. I watched them take notes. I watched a man in the 3rd row write something down and underline it twice. I watched a woman near the window look up from her notepad and simply watch my father's face for a long moment, as though the face itself was information. When he finished, they stood. 200 European cardiologists got to their feet for my father. The applause was not polite. It was the applause of people who have received something real and know it, and want the person who gave it to know they know it. It went on for longer than applause usually goes. My father stood at the podium. He nodded once, with the composed dignity of a man who had always known this moment was coming because he had always known the work deserved it. Then he stepped back from the podium and collected his papers and returned to his seat in the front row. I was in the back of the room. I was 12 years old. I was crying. I did not try to stop it. I was not ashamed of it. There was no one near me, and it did not matter, and some feelings are simply larger than the capacity to contain them, and this was one of those feelings. I sat in the back of the room in Paris, France, and I watched my father receive what he was owed, and I cried with the completeness of a child who does not yet know he is supposed to hold things in, and it was one of the finest moments of my life. On the taxi back to the hotel that evening, my father looked out the window at Paris going past. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, to the window, "You did well on the airplane, Elijah." That was all he said about it. Ever. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. I came home from Paris different. Not different in a way that was visible to anyone immediately. 12-year-old boys from Birmingham do not come back from Paris announcing that they have been transformed. But I knew. Something had settled in me that had not been settled before, a particular kind of certainty that is not arrogance and not stubbornness, but something between them, something more durable than either. I joined the debate team at my school the following September. I was the only black student on the team. I won the state championship in my junior year. I did not dedicate the win to the woman in the blue uniform. I was not that kind of boy, and it would have given her too much of my interior life. But I thought about seat 4A when the judge announced the result. I thought about it briefly, and then I thought about what came next. What came next was Howard University, then law school at Yale, then 15 years practicing constitutional law, then the federal bench. What came next was 22 years of rulings, some of which I am proud of, some of which I look back on and think I could have gone further, none of which I am ashamed of. What came next was your grandmother, who was the finest legal mind I have ever encountered, and the person who taught me that precision and warmth are not opposites, that you can be both, that the combination is in fact more powerful than either alone. What came next was your mother, and then you. Every room I have walked into since that airplane, every courtroom, every conference room, every chamber where important things were decided by important people, I have walked in for the boy in seat 4A, not with anger, not with the need to prove anything to anyone who doubted me, with the quiet knowledge that I belonged exactly where I was. Because I do. Because I always did. Because my father told me so on a hallway floor in Birmingham while he polished my shoes, and my father did not say things he did not mean. I have walked into every room of my life as a person who belongs in it. Because I was shown how. Because a man in a good suit took his 12-year-old son to Paris and sat beside him in first class and picked up his conference papers and continued. Because excellence is the argument. Because the work is the answer. Because you do not move. You simply do not move. Zora, Mrs. Hendricks did something shameful today. I want you to hear that clearly, not as a comfort, not as a dismissal of what you felt when she said what she said, but as a fact. She looked at your record, at your scores, at the numbers that 14 years of your particular brain working at full capacity have produced, and she made a decision that had nothing to do with those numbers. She made a decision that was about what she saw when she looked at you, which is a thing she carries and not a thing you gave her. The shame is hers, not yours. I know it does not feel that way right now. I know it arrived as a question about yourself, whether you were enough, whether you had overestimated something, whether there was a quality the room required that she had correctly identified you as lacking. I know because I felt it at 12, sitting in seat 4A, looking out at a tarmac in Birmingham, while I waited to find out if I was going to be moved. I was not moved, and you will not be moved either. Not by Mrs. Hendricks. Not by anyone. Your job is this. You're going to walk into that advanced program the way my father told me to walk onto that airplane. Like you have been in 100 rooms like it. Not with anger. Anger is energy spent on people who do not deserve your energy. Not with the need to prove anything. You have nothing to prove to anyone in that building. Your scores are the proof, and they were established before you walked into Mrs. Hendricks's office, and they will stand after she is gone. Simply with the knowledge that you belong exactly where you are. Because you do, Zora. You belong exactly where you are. And I want you to understand something else. Something that took me a long time to fully grasp, and that I am giving you now because you are ready for it, and because you should not have to wait 53 years the way I did. When you walk into that room, you are not walking in alone. You are walking in with me. with the boy in seat 4A who counted to 660 seconds on a tarmac and did not let his face do anything, and came out the other side of the Atlantic standing in Paris eating a croissant and laughing. You are walking in with your great-grandfather, who put down his conference papers and then picked them back up and reviewed them all the way to Paris and stood in front of 200 European cardiologists and brought them to their feet. You are walking in with your grandmother, who walked into courtrooms that had never held a black woman of her caliber and walked out of them having changed what those courtrooms understood about the law. You are walking in with all of us. Every room you enter, we are in it with you. And one day, I promise you this, Zora, and I am a man who does not make promises he cannot keep, one day a girl will come to you. She will be 14 or 17 or 22. She will have come from something that tried to tell her she did not belong in a room she belonged in. And you will sit with her the way I am sitting with you. And you will tell her about the advanced program. And she will walk into it. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. One person at a time, carrying something from the person who carried it before them, walking into rooms. She asked me what Paris was like. I had been speaking for perhaps an hour. The tea had gone cold. The room had grown darker, and I had turned on the second lamp, and we had been sitting in the warm doubled light like two people in a painting of a conversation that matters. She had not moved the whole time. When Zora is receiving something important, she goes completely still. She always has. Since before she had language for the things that mattered, she had the instinct to be still in their presence. And then, after I told her about walking into rooms and carrying all of us with her, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "Grandpa, what was Paris like?" Not, "What do I do on Monday?" Not, "What happened to Mrs. Hendricks?" What was Paris like? I looked at my granddaughter in the lamplight, and I started to laugh. A real laugh. The laugh of a 65-year-old man being surprised by a 14-year-old girl in the best possible way. I said, "Paris was magnificent. Your great-grandfather brought 200 European cardiologists to their feet, and I sat in the back of the room and cried like a faucet, and I was not the least bit ashamed of it." Her face opened into a smile. I said, "And the croissants were the size of my face." I found a bakery 2 streets from the hotel and stood on the pavement and ate one in 45 seconds. I have spent 53 years looking for one that comes close, and I intend to go back to Paris before I die and stand on that pavement again. She laughed. Her grandmother's laugh, deep, unguarded, the laugh of someone who finds the world genuinely surprising. It broke open the room. Everything that had been held tight, her pain, my memory, the weight of 53 years and one difficult afternoon, released into that laugh like air from a room that needed opening. We sat in the lamplight, and I told her about Paris. The light on the Seine. The hotel where the staff called my father Dr. Whitmore, and meant it. The conference hall, and the 200 faces turning toward the podium. The standing ovation that went on and on. A boy in the back of the room who cried without shame because the world had shown him something true. She listened with her whole self. When I finished, it was nearly 9 o'clock. She stood and put on her jacket and hugged me. A real hug, her arms around me, her face against my shoulder. Then she looked up. She said, "I'm going to be in that program, Grandpa." I said, "I know you are." She said, "Mrs. Hendricks is going to regret that conversation." I said, "She is going to have a great deal to regret by Friday." Zora smiled. She picked up her bag. She went home. I sat in the chair for a while after she left. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when someone has recently been in them. Not empty, but recently full. The 2 lamps were on. The bookshelves stood in their rows. On the mantel, my father in his white medical coat. My wife Margaret in the garden she loved, laughing at something off the edge of the frame. My daughter at her law school graduation, chin lifted. Zora at 10, squinting into the sun in front of the Supreme Court. I looked at my father's photograph for a long time. I thought about his hands on my shoes in that Birmingham hallway. His hands on his conference papers in the dark over the Atlantic, moving across the pages with the steady focus of a man who has decided that his work is the answer, and he is not going to be interrupted from it by anyone. The standing ovation and the single nod with which he received it. I thought about what I would say to him now if I could. I think I would say it was sufficient. Every bit of it. The suit and the shoes and the walk and the seat and the picking up of the papers. All of it was sufficient. It carried me 53 years, and tonight I gave it to your great-granddaughter, and she is going to carry it further than either of us went. I turned off the reading lamp. The room settled into the light of the single lamp by the window. I was not sad. I was complete. I had carried the story for 53 years and given it to the person who needed it and watched it do what I hoped it would do. In real time, in her face, in the laugh that broke the room open. In the morning I called the school. I asked for the principal, and I used the voice I had used on the federal bench for 22 years. Quiet, precise, carrying the weight of 2 decades of consequential decisions. I explained, without raising that voice by a single register, that Zora Whitmore would be enrolled in the Advanced Mathematics and Sciences Accelerated program immediately. That her academic record supported this without any reasonable dispute. That any further conversation about her suitability for the program was one I would be very interested to have in detail. By Friday, Zora was in the room. She walked in like she had been in 100 rooms like it. Because she had been told to. Because I told her. Because my father told me. Because his father told him, in whatever words were available, in whatever year it was when the Whitmore men first understood that the rooms were theirs and they were not leaving. We do not leave. We have never left. Through the window, Atlanta at night, enormous and lit, full of rooms waiting to be walked into by a 14-year-old girl with careful eyes and her great-grandfather's jaw and a laugh that comes from somewhere deep. I went to bed. In the morning I made the call.